Where legends breathe again. Eldmyth. You never see her, but when you hear her cry, someone is already marked for death. In the dark nights of Irish legend, the Banshee does not hunt, does not attack, she warns. A single wail carried by the wind announces a death that cannot be stopped. But who is she really? A spirit, a cursed woman, or something far older than fear itself? The wind does not simply blow in certain forgotten corners of the world. It carries a memory. It carries a sound. Not a shriek, not at first, but a whisper so delicate it could be the rustle of dead leaves against a tombstone, or the sigh of a long-abandoned house settling into its foundations. This is the first harbinger. This is the breath before the storm. We are about to step into the liminal space, the threshold between the world we know and the world of ancient omen, to meet a being woven from sorrow and storm, the Banshee. Forget what you think you know. This is not a mere ghost story to frighten children. This is an exploration of a profound and chilling mythic echo, a creature whose very existence is a symphony of grief. Imagine the deepest, darkest hour of the night, when the veil between the living and the dead is said to grow thin. Picture a landscape of ancient, gnarled trees, their skeletal fingers clawing at a moonlit sky shredded by swift, spectral clouds. The air is cold and damp, carrying the rich, loamy scent of decaying earth and distant rain. And then you hear it. A vibration in the silence, a resonance felt in the marrow of your bones before it reaches your ears. It begins as a low, almost inaudible keen, a sound of such profound loneliness that it seems to draw the warmth from your very blood. This is the call of the Banshee. Her story is written not in ink, but in the collective fear and reverence of generations. A haunting melody that has drifted through the misty glens and over the lonely moors of Ireland for centuries, a warning etched in sound itself. To understand the Banshee is to first understand the soil from which she sprang. Her roots are buried deep in the rich, dark peat of Celtic mythology, intertwined with the ancient Irish belief in the Aos She, the people of the mounds. These were not gods in the classical sense, but powerful, capricious spirits of nature and the otherworld, existing alongside humanity in a parallel, shimmering reality. The Banshee, or Bean Shia in the Old Tongue, literally woman of the fairy mounds, is one of these beings. She is inherently tied to the land and, more specifically, to the old, noble families of Ireland, those whose bloodlines were thought to have a pact or a profound connection with the She. She is not a universal omen of death for all, but a personalized, familial herald. Her loyalty is to lineage, not to individuals. The earliest written references are sparse, glimpsed in medieval texts and bardic tales, but her presence was felt long before it was ever written down. She is a relic of a pre-Christian worldview, where death was not an end but a transition, and where the spirits of the land took an active interest in the fortunes of those who walked upon it. Scholars see in her a complex symbol, a personification of the wailing of women at a traditional keeneed or funeral lament, a guardian spirit warning her chosen family of impending passage, or a more fearsome, remnant spirit of a woman wronged, forever bound to mourn. Her image evolved through oral tradition, shaped by the fears of isolated communities listening to the wind howl through the ruins of a famine cottage, or the creak of an old yew tree in a graveyard. She is Ireland's mythic psyche given sound, a melody of mortality composed in a minor key. The encounter with a banshee was never sought, but it was prepared for through a tapestry of folklore practices, rituals, and deeply ingrained taboos. For the families who believed she attended them, her cry was a sacred, if terrifying, signal. Upon hearing the first mournful notes carried on the night wind, specific protocols were unconsciously followed. Doors and windows might be secured, not to bar her entry, for no physical barrier could stop a spirit, but as a reflexive gesture of respect and boundary. Hearth fires were banked, and family would often gather together, speaking in hushed tones, awaiting the confirmation of a death, sometimes from a great distance. There were tales of protective charms, iron, that ancient repellent of fairy folk, placed above a door, sprigs of rowan or holly woven into a charm, or the recitation of certain prayers that blended Christian faith with older pagan invocations. Yet, offerings were rarely made to appease her, for she was not a malevolent force to be bribed, but a function of fate to be acknowledged. The true rituals belonged to the listening. Villagers, hearing the cry from a nearby lonely glen or the ruins of an old estate, would cross themselves and whisper a prayer for the soon-to-be bereaved. They understood the sound as a communal touchstone, a reminder of the thinness of life. The emotional landscape of these moments was complex, a layered cake of dread, reverence, and solemn acceptance. The fear was not of the Banshee herself, but of the immutable truth she announced. In the flickering candlelight of a thatched cottage, with the wind moaning in the chimney, the sound would weave itself into the very fabric of the night, transforming the familiar into something charged with ancient significance. Every creak of the house, every rustle of an animal in the thatch became part of her symphony, until the mind could scarcely distinguish between natural sound and supernatural warning. Her appearance is as variable and shifting as the mist she often rides, yet certain key features coalesce across hundreds of years of testimony. The most common form is that of a woman, though her aspect speaks of eternity, not mortality. She is often described as tall and gaunt, with an unnatural paleness to her skin that seems to drink the moonlight, reflecting instead a faint, internal luminescence like phosphorus on a deep-sea creature. Her hair is typically long and wild, the color of frost or tarnished silver, streaming behind her as if she is perpetually submerged in a spectral current. Her eyes, when visible, are red-rimmed from endless weeping, or sometimes glow with a soft, sorrowful light. Her garments are the stuff of graves, winding sheets, tattered gray robes that flutter without a wind, or the remnants of a fine gown from a bygone century, now faded and decayed. She may be seen kneeling by a stream washing blood from phantom shrouds, a chilling vision known as the Bean Nye, a related omen. In other accounts, she is a beautiful, mournful young woman with tragic eyes, or a fearsome crone with a gaping mouth from which the terrible cry emerges. Some legends grant her more overtly supernatural traits. She might float above the ground, her feet not touching the dew-laden grass. She may transform into a hooded crow or a weasel, creatures of ill omen, or her form might flicker and dissolve into the fog from which she emerged. The environment reacts to her. The air grows preternaturally still and cold in her immediate presence, a pocket of winter in the midst of an autumn night. A sweet, cloying scent like rotting flowers or damp earth sometimes accompanies her. This malleability is key to her power. She is a Rorschach blot of grief, taking the shape that most deeply unnerves the witness, reflecting back their own deepest fears of loss and mortality. One of the most persistent and chilling legends tells of a young bard named Sion, who dared to spend a night within the crumbling walls of Cashleon and Broyne, the Castle of Sorrow, to find inspiration for a lament. The castle had been abandoned by its noble family after the last heir died a century prior, but the locals swore the family's Banshee still frequented its broken towers. Sion, armed with youthful bravado and a harp, built a small fire in the great hall. As midnight approached, a silence descended so completely it felt like pressure on the ears. Then, from the highest ruined battlement, the keening began. It was a sound, Sion later said, that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the soul, conjuring images of every loss he had ever suffered. Rather than flee, he did something unprecedented. He began to play. His fingers, trembling at first, found the strings of his harp, and he wove a countermelody to her wail, a tune of his own, not to defy her sorrow, but to acknowledge it, to harmonize with it. The wailing paused. A mist, cold and dense, poured down the stone stairs and coalesced into the form of a woman in a gown of faded green silk. Her eyes were not fierce, but infinitely tired. She did not speak, but she listened as Sion played through the night, her form flickering with the firelight. At dawn, as the first light touched the stones, she simply faded, leaving behind only a single, frost-kissed rose on the hearthstone. Sion left the castle with a masterpiece of mournful music, but also with a profound melancholy he never shook. The story suggests a fleeting, tragic connection possible between the human and the preternatural, but one that always leaves a mark of the otherworld's chill on the living soul. Not all encounters were passive or harmonious. The annals tell of foolish or arrogant men who sought to challenge the omen, to silence the warning. One such tale is of a Norman knight, Sir Roland, who seized a Gaelic lord's lands. He mocked the peasants' talk of a wailing woman and swore to hunt this specter that lamented the fallen family. Armed with sword and a crucifix, he rode out at dusk to a known fairy fort. When the first high, clear note of the keen sliced the twilight, he charged toward the sound, shouting profanities and brandishing his steel. What he found in the clearing was not a fragile spirit, but a fury. The Banshee's form swelled, her hair lashing like storm-tossed branches, her eyes becoming pools of blackness. Her mournful cry transformed into a shriek of such tangible force that it physically buffeted the knight, causing his horse to rear in terror and throw him. The sound, witnesses later claimed, did not just strike the ears. It felt like ice water in the veins and needles in the brain. Sir Roland fled, not from fear of a ghost, but from a primal, overwhelming sense of desolation and wrath that shattered his courage. He was found the next morning, wandering the boglands, muttering incoherently, his hair turned white. He never spoke rationally again and died within a fortnight, a fever claiming him. This legend serves as a brutal reminder. The Banshee is not a ghost to be exorcised by iron or faith. She is an elemental function of an older world, a natural law given voice. To attack her is to attack the fabric of fate itself, and the consequence is a psychic unraveling, a soul stained by a sorrow it was never meant to comprehend. The Banshee's symbolism is a deep well, drawing from themes far beyond a simple death warning. She is, at her core, a manifestation of embaz or poetic inspiration, specifically the inspiration of lament. In ancient Celtic culture, the poet's role was sacred, and a skilled elegy could ensure the deceased's memory lived on. The Banshee is that elegy made flesh and sound, the living spirit of memorial. She also represents the concept of filioct, the inherent poetry and tragedy of the land itself. Her cries are the lament of Ireland for its lost heroes, its fallen chieftains, and its own suffering through famine and invasion. She is the land weeping. Psychologically, she embodies the human fear of the unknown sound in the night, the personification of the chilling intuition that bad news is coming, the knock on the door at an odd hour, the ring of the telephone in the dead of night. She gives form to that gut-wrenching suspense. Furthermore, she symbolizes the feminine aspect of death, not as a violent reaper, but as a mourner, a washer of the body, a guide for the soul. This contrasts sharply with the more common masculine personifications of death in Western culture. She is a reminder that death is not only an end, but a process involving grief, ritual, and the communal voice of women who have traditionally been the keepers of funeral rites. Her enduring power lies in this multifaceted symbolism. She is at once a family guardian, a land spirit, a psychological archetype, and a cultural repository for the profound, complex emotions surrounding loss. The tale of the O'Donnell family Banshee is perhaps the most famous and poignant of all. For generations, she was known as the Little Woman of the Sorrows, appearing not as a fearsome specter, but as a small, grief-stricken figure who would be seen washing armor in a stream before a battle loss, or weeping at the castle gates before a chieftain fell. Her relationship with the clan was almost familial, a terrible but accepted bond. The story culminates during the flight of the Earls in 1607, the tragic exodus of Irish nobility. As the O'Donnell chieftain prepared to secretly depart his homeland forever, the Banshee did not wail from a distance. She materialized inside the castle itself, in the very chamber where he made his final preparations. She did not scream, but sang a low, heartbreaking song in the old tongue, a lament not just for his impending death in exile, but for the death of a way of life, for the end of an era. The chieftain, it is said, paused and listened, tears streaming down his own face, recognizing the song as one his nurse had hummed in his childhood. He bowed his head to her, this spirit of his blood, in a final act of acknowledgement. Then she faded, and he departed into a history that would forget him, but the myth would remember this intimate, tragic farewell. This legend elevates the Banshee from omen to participant, a witness to history whose sorrow encompasses not just individual mortality, but cultural cataclysm. It underscores her role as the memory and the conscience of a lineage, singing its elegy even as its living members walk into oblivion. While the Banshee is quintessentially Irish, her spectral sisters appear across the Celtic world, each adapting to their local landscape and culture. In Scotland, she is the bean nye or washerwoman, seen by lonely locks scrubbing the blood-stained clothes of those destined to die. Her appearance is often more grotesque, with one nostril, one large tooth, and webbed feet. But if a person is bold enough to sneak up and suck her breast, they can claim her as a foster mother and gain a wish. This introduces an element of interaction and potential gain absent from the Irish tradition. In Wales, traces of a similar being exist in the Gyrach Ribbon, a hideous hag with bat-like wings and a terrifying shriek who lurks in mountain passes and rivers. Her cry, "Fi mh Lenton, Fi mh Lenton," my child, is more actively menacing. On the Isle of Man, the Benvie is known. These variations paint a picture of a regional mythos where a feminine death spirit is a common archetype, but her demeanor, appearance, and the rules of engagement shift with the topography and local fears. The Irish Banshee remains the most poetically developed, her tie to nobility and her predominantly mournful, rather than predatory, nature setting her apart. Comparing these cousins highlights how the core concept, a female spirit heralding death, is a powerful, flexible motif that roots itself deeply in specific soils, growing into unique but related forms, each reflecting the character of the people who told her stories. The transformation myth of the Banshee offers a heartbreaking origin story for some of these beings. They are not always ancient owls she. Sometimes, they are human souls trapped in a cycle of eternal grief. One legend tells of Ashlyn, a woman of a noble house who drowned her own child in a fit of madness and then died by suicide. Denied peace in the afterlife, she was bound to the mortal realm as a punishment and a penance. Her spectral form became attached to her own family line, and whenever a member was to die, she would relive the moment of her ultimate loss, her drowned child's face appearing in the mind of the dying at the moment of passing. Her wail was the echo of her own eternal sorrow, now inextricably linked to the mortality of her kin. Another tale speaks of a young betrothed woman who was murdered on the eve of her wedding by a rival clan. Her spirit, unable to rest without the marriage rite that would have completed her life's journey, became the Banshee for both families, her own and that of her lost husband-to-be, lamenting the future that was stolen from all of them. These transformation stories add a layer of profound tragedy to the myth. The Banshee is not just an omen, she is a victim, a soul caught in a feedback loop of personal anguish, her individual torment now magnified to a supernatural scale. This makes her a figure of pity as much as fear, a reminder that some griefs are so colossal they can warp the very soul and echo through centuries. The Banshee did not vanish with the advent of modernity. She evolved, seeping from oral folklore into the broader streams of global popular culture. In film, her piercing cry has been borrowed and adapted for countless horror movie soundtracks, a shorthand for supernatural terror. She appears directly in animation and fantasy films, often stylized as a beautiful, tragic ghost or a powerful magical entity. In literature, from Gothic novels to contemporary fantasy series, she is reimagined as a complex character, sometimes a villain, sometimes a misunderstood ally. Video games have rendered her in pixels and polygons, making her a monster to be battled or a quest giver shrouded in mystery. This modern translation often loses the nuanced, familial specificity of the original myth, transforming her into a more generic ghost or a monster. Yet even in this dilution, her core power, the mournful scream, remains potent. Her symbolism has been adopted in psychology, with Banshee sometimes used to describe a person, often a woman expressing raw, unrestrained grief or anger, giving a mythic name to a powerful human emotion. This journey from hearthside fear to global icon demonstrates the myth's adaptability. While the belief in her literal existence has faded outside of isolated communities, her archetype persists because it speaks to a universal human experience. The dread of loss, the sound of grief, and the haunting feeling that the universe itself might be mourning with us. Perhaps the most chilling accounts are not the ancient legends, but the purported modern encounters, whispered in pubs or shared on late-night internet forums. A hill walker on a solo trek through the Connemara Mountains describes a night so still he could hear his own heartbeat. Then, from a valley swathed in cloud, a rising and falling melody that was like a violin string breaking over and over again. He felt an overwhelming, irrational urge to weep, and a coldness that had nothing to do with the altitude. He camped far from that valley and learned later that an elderly man from a village at the foot of that very mountain had died that same night. A woman living in an old Georgian house in Dublin, a house built on the grounds of a demolished estate, reports hearing a soft weeping in the walls during storms. It began shortly before her grandfather died in another country, and again years later before her aunt passed. She describes it not as frightening, but as deeply, profoundly sad, a sound that makes the house feel like it's holding its breath. These stories, whether explained by suggestion, infrasound, or something else, keep the myth alive. They prove that the Banshee does not need to be seen to be believed. She is primarily a creature of sound. In our noisy modern world, perhaps we have simply forgotten how to listen for her. But in those rare moments of absolute quiet, when the machinery of civilization halts and the ancient voice of the land can be heard, who is to say what melodies of sorrow might still drift on the edge of the wind? So what is the Banshee in the end? Is she a ghost, a fairy, a psychopomp, or a collective hallucination? She is all these things and none of them. She is a story that has lasted 1,000 years because it answers a deep human need, to give form to the formless terror of imminent loss, to hear in nature's random noises a pattern, however grim, that makes sense of chaos. She ritualizes the moment before the phone rings with bad news, giving it a shape and a sound. In a world that often seeks to sanitize and silence death, the Banshee is a defiant, primal scream of mourning. She refuses to let grief be quiet or private. She broadcasts it across the hills, making it a public, natural event. She is a testament to the power of sound, of the human voice in its most raw and emotional state, to transcend the barrier between worlds. She reminds us that certain families, certain places, carry stories in their very bones, stories that whisper of loss and loyalty. And she poses a haunting, unanswerable question. Is it more terrible to die unwarned, or to hear your death approaching on the wind, sung in a voice of eternal sorrow? The Banshee offers no comfort, only acknowledgement. She is the truth that some news is written in the landscape long before it reaches our ears, and that the night itself remembers every tear ever shed. Another legend fades, but the next awaits. Like this video, subscribe and continue the journey through myths.